work. Some years ago, I actually was doing an inspection in downtown Birmingham. Although I owned a shotgun, that's the only weapon that I had, and I was going onto a property, and the moment I turned into an alleyway, I turned into the wrong alleyway. And I found myself amidst a gang drug deal. And it was going bad, and I was right in the middle of it in downtown Birmingham. And I feared for my life. I did not own a weapon. I didn't have a concealed weapons permit. I was not a member of the National Rifle Association. Quite frankly, I just hadn't given it a whole lot of thought. These guys came at me, weapons drawn, and I shoved the transmission of my Dodge Ram in reverse, and I got out of there as fast as I could, hit Division Avenue, and drove down the street, took a hard right into a dead-end road. And I looked in my rearview mirror, and here came this gang of young men. They weren't coming to say hello, and it was the most fearful, disgusting, helpless feeling I've ever sensed in my entire life. Again, I was able to escape from there, but I went straight to a gun store and purchased my very first weapon. And I'm proud to say, all these years later, I've never had to draw down on everybody, but I tell you the reason I did it was I feared for my life, the life of my family. He wasn't there, but I thought my kids were going to lose their dad that day. And I began to realize in a very real time, see, my story of gun ownership and protection of our constitutional rights is personal. And I know that it is for so many of you. And one of the proudest documents that I have in my wallet, next to my driver's license and pictures of my kid, is my NRA card, which keeps my concealed weapons permit company each and every day. And I'm delighted to be able to tell people that I am a gun advocate. I am a supporter of the Second Amendment. But you know what's really interesting in talking about our constitutional rights? Very oftentimes people talk about that we have the right to have militias. We have the right to carry. We have the right to bear arms. And as a talk radio host, I'm in a unique situation that I'm introduced to a lot of different perspectives because I get calls off the air, on the air. I get a lot of emails. Right now in my inbox, I have somewhere north of 900 emails, a lot of which deal with this very issue. And one of the things that's kind of fascinating to me, when we're talking about conservatives versus liberals, and I've said it at a gun rally in Montgomery a couple of weeks ago, you may find this kind of a weird thing to share with you, but I believe it in my heart. As right-wing Christian conservatives, we have a responsibility to protect the liberal left from what they don't know and understand. And one of them is the Second Amendment right. Because here's what's interesting about the Second Amendment as it relates to gun ownership. We talk about militias. We talk about my right and your right to have a concealed weapon. Last week we talked about open carry in the state of Alabama. We can't stay here till midnight because we could exhaust that subject, and I assure you I will revisit on my program in the very near future, because quite frankly it's fascinating here in the state of Alabama. But you know what's interesting is that when we talk about the Second Amendment, we leave out one very key thing, and that's the First Amendment. The First Amendment gives us the right, for one, obviously it protects the state from forming any kind of a religion that we have to abide by. It protects our freedom of speech rights. It protects our rights for regress against the federal government. It protects our right to do what we're doing here today, which is peaceable assembly. What people don't understand on the left is that our Second Amendment is designed not only to allow for militias, but the Second Amendment is designed to protect the First Amendment. And if they don't understand that, then it's not even really a gun issue. It's a free speech issue, it's a religion issue, it's a government issue, it's an assembly issue. We're supposed to be able to keep guns to keep the government from taking those things away from us. When the founders put the Bill of Rights in place, they were stacked, from their perspective, in order of their importance in that time. Because also what's interesting is, this little piece of paper here doesn't just, and it's in the Constitution. Again, I'm not an expert on it. I know what I know. But this not only protects my right to carry a gun, it protects your right to be here, and it specifically uses the word press. My right to speak to you, for us to assemble, and to get together as a group and as a community. And people on the left don't understand that. My heart, as with every single one of yours, was broken when the Newtown, Connecticut tragedy happened. And we can point to dozens of others. But that's not the point. The point has never been about guns, and I know that death and crime and these horrific events they're terrible. These are things that we're going to resolve on our knees, not by stripping the Second Amendment of its rights to give us the opportunity to speak out against them in the first place. What's interesting is people on the left in particular, they don't understand these things. They look at crime rates and they look at the gun usage and all these mundane statistics that mean nothing. And they don't realize the general larger picture here is that when we carry or we own or whatever we protect, that we're protecting the Constitution, which protects their idiotic rights to many of their idiotic positions. And I know I don't mean to sound crass because I try to be respectful. My family is eaten up with liberals. And trust me when I tell you, Thanksgiving at the Hart household can be interesting. But I have never, in the years I've been a concealed weapons holder, never discharged my weapon in anger. I've never pulled my weapon in anger. But boy, I tell you what, when I'm driving down the highway and it's 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and somebody pulls up next to me and gives me that look, I feel a whole lot safer. It's not just a matter of just the militias. It's a matter of what we can do. It's a matter of being able to protect ourselves and our families and, again, our rights and abilities to protect people that just don't understand it. Something else that's kind of interesting about liberals is that, and I'm not busting on them specifically. I'm not looking at them as people as much as they have an ideology, is that they very oftentimes will argue to their detriment. And we have got to make absolutely certain, in my opinion, that we take the Second Amendment right beyond just the Second Amendment and apply it to the fact that really truly is the only defense that we have in the God-given rights of the pursuit of liberty and happiness. And if we don't understand that we fail to get the message to them. People oftentimes ask me, all right, Michael, let's find a well. What are we going to do about it? Pragmatic, practical solutions. Well, one of them is what we're doing here today. But there's something else that I'm going to charge you to do. And it's kind of interesting. It might even sound kind of weird to somebody. About 3 or 4 years ago, I was at a Tea Party event in Trussville, Alabama, right outside of Birmingham. And while I was there, I got to meet Jefferson County Sheriff Mike Hale. Pardon me, I'm having a Marco Rubio moment. And while speaking to Sheriff Hale, we were talking about gun control and legislation and concealed weapons. And all of a sudden, this flatbed truck pulls up, and they took the trailer off, they parked, and all these deputies came out. And I asked the sheriff, I said, what are you doing? He says, we're having a concealed weapons permit party. I said, what are you talking about? The sheriff of Jefferson County actually went to the state legislature here in Alabama and petitioned the legislature to reduce the fee from $20 to $7.50 for concealed weapon permit. Then he had his deputies fan out into the crowd to encourage people to sign up for a concealed weapons permit, even if they didn't have one. The idea was he was trying to demonstrate to the legislature support of gun ownership rights and laws, because it's great for us to assemble as a group. It is not, however, all we can do. And I'm going to challenge you and charge you and encourage you. If you don't have a concealed weapons permit, get one. I don't care if you own a gun. That's not the point. The point is support, not of the Second Amendment as much as the First Amendment by protecting the Second Amendment. And we do that by showing our support of it. Mr. Crawford, Don Crawford, who owns 101, it's now called the Superstation 101 WYDE, as well as WXJC and WDJC, the Christian Music Station, does not own a gun. He does not carry a gun. He is a devout supporter, however, of the Second Amendment. He is just one of those kind of people that's just not a gun enthusiast. Some of you probably have more guns than my entire family owns. I own 3 or 4 rifles and 3 or 4 pistols. That's probably all that I'll ever own. But the thing about it is, he supports those things, as does Sheriff Mike Hale. So in our support of the Second Amendment, we don't necessarily have to have a gun. We have to have the exercising of our rights to everybody else to own one. And you can do that. I don't know what it is here in this county. I don't know about the counties you're in. But how much? $15 to get a concealed weapons permit. 16 if you want it laminated. If you ain't got $16, I'll give it to you. But get the concealed weapons. Everybody here, every single one of you here, get a concealed weapons permit. Because that's what sends the message. Because these politicians, listen, they listen to my program. I know I'm not the only talk radio host in the state. They listen to all of us. They want to know, and when you go out, when you start, and you make sure they understand that you're active and participating in the process in terms of having these permits, they do pay attention to that. I don't want to go too long for them in terms of concealed carry, but somebody was asking me the other day, why do we have to have a permit or why do we have to have a license to carry in America? The Second Amendment provides for that. That's true, but let's really be realistic and pragmatic about it. It's not really a license to carry, it's just a different form of tax. But the thing about it is a tax that, unlike other taxes, is very vocal, and they do pay attention to it. So I would encourage you to do that. Something else I would encourage you to do, and I know most of you probably already do this. When you go to the gun range, take the kids. Teach your children how to use a firearm responsibly. Teach them about not only the Second Amendment, but gun ownership. 3 years ago, my youngest daughter and I, at the time I lived in the woods of the country, and I had my 38, my Saturday night special, my snub nose. I was going to go shoot in the woods, and I took her up there, but she's standing behind me, she's not paying attention. And I insisted, I made her fire that gun. And it was the cutest thing in the world. Here she is, 13 years old, and this thing, for those of you that know what a 2-inch 38 sounds like, it's a cannon. And I fired that gun, and I mean, I'm blasting those little bottles, and they're blowing up all over the place, and she's looking at me, and she doesn't know what's going on. I put that gun in her hand, and she's trembling with that little 13-year-old hand. She doesn't know what to do, and she fires that gun one time, and she turns up at me, and she gives me a look like she had just won the lottery. Next thing you know, she looks up at Dad, and she looks back down that target, and she unloaded that thing in that bag. And now every other weekend, she will call me up and say, Daddy, can we go shoot? My kids know how to use a gun. My kids are respectful of a gun. But my children understand, as many of you do as well, what that gun really represents. Because I'm going to tell you something. This is going to sound trivial, but think about this. Every time you pull that trigger, you are defending your right to it. You are defending your freedom, and you are defending this country. Now, that's not for a moment to play down the enormous responsibility and contribution of our U.S. military. But right here domestically, every time you dislodge your gun, you are expressing your support of your liberty and freedom. And that is something you need to instill in your children. I take it one step further. They need to be teaching gun ownership and usage in our schools. This might sound like somewhat of a trite thing to say, but most people, I know you don't know this, because you listen to radio, you listen to talk radio. Most people in this world, they don't get it. They don't understand. You know, they're going to watch football, and I love my football teams. You know, I love NASCAR races. You know, I love hanging out at sporting events and taking my kids to them. I love watching TV. My girlfriend's daughter's on to dancing with this and dancing with that. I get all those distractions. But the reality of the world we live in today has got too many people paying too much attention to that and not enough attention to this. I'm going to tell you something that might not be popular, but I feel like I need to say it anyway. The world, as we know it politically, did not begin to unravel with the election of Barack Obama. Presidents, Republican and Democrat alike, have been testing the fabric of the United States Constitution for 200 years. It is within the nature of politicians to expand their power. Now, don't get me wrong. I am a right-wing Christian conservative gun-toting loon. The likelihood that I'm going to vote for a Democrat is extraordinarily low, although I have in the past, because I felt like they were the best, never at the national level, but I felt like they were the best candidate in certain circumstances. But with that said, we have got to understand in this country that there has been a constant and overwhelming erosion of these rights, and that the rights that we have are only protected by the Second Amendment. We have got to make certain that we're speaking out, reaching out, participating. Go to the gun range. It's interesting to note how many people in law enforcement have approached me over the last several years, encouraging me to encourage you to own a gun. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. I lived for 10 years in Atlanta, Georgia. 2 of my 3 children were born there. 25 miles north of Atlanta is a little town called Kennesaw. It is a misdemeanor, a high misdemeanor in Kennesaw to not own a firearm in your home. The town almost has no crime because an armed society is indeed a polite society. There are people in this country that believe that you, and I will let this gentleman take this a little bit further, that believe that me and you have a constitutional duty to carry.
Yes.
Because we are here to defend our communities, our churches, our states. I go to a church that has a cop in the lobby. I don't need a cop in the lobby of the church. They got me. Now, I'm not, by the way, before I'm saying pass over the crowd, I'm not encouraging you to pack in the pew. But the point still remains the same. We are the greatest security force this country ever has. No other countries are going to come here. There's an estimated 800,000 firearms in Wyoming alone. Really? No. We already are a militia. So the reality of the situation for this as a state and a nation is to understand that we need to bring other people into this. And we're going to do that in part by, I don't mean softening the defense of the Second Amendment, but softening the message to get people to understand what they don't currently grasp. Is that if we lose our rights to carry or own, we lose our rights to free speech, we lose our rights to assemble, we lose our rights to attend the church of our choice. I don't know how many of you remember this, but there was a swine flu scare 3 or 4 years ago, the H1N1. There was legislation being drafted under the pretense and auspices of keeping you from getting the flu to prevent Americans from assembling in churches, malls, or in Publix as we went on a national quarantine. That's insane.
Yeah.
Don't think for one moment they haven't discussed it. Don't think for one moment it's purely a problem with the liberal left, because it's not. Politicians, you think about this, and I know we're getting kind of long here, so I'm going to surrender this microphone in just a moment, but I want you to think about something. I want you to think about it very carefully. I'm being very serious about this for a moment. I think it's suffice to say it's a very safe statement for me that the majority of people in this crowd are conservatives. Politicians, particularly at the highest levels, don't like uber conservative voters. The reason for that is, as conservatives, despite the fact they might be conservatives as well, in terms of governing, conservatives are too independent for them. We think independently. Politicians, you hear how politicians might run on the right but move towards the center. They might get elected on the right, but they govern from the middle. Because they do that because they've got to be able to appeal to the greatest amount of voters. By our very nature as conservatives, we think too freely for their tastes. That's not to, and by the way, that's not to say every single politician thinks that way. One of my good friends back in Birmingham, Scott Beeson, has my ultimate support on a lot of these very issues. It's being debated in Montgomery right now. There's a dozen bills as far as gun legislation in Montgomery right now. But at the federal level, a lot of politicians need to keep us compartmentalized, whether we be soccer moms or grizzly moms or military or hippies or yuppies or dingoes or whatever they call us. That is their job, because as conservatives, we think very, very independently, but we are the strongest body of voters in this country when we move collectively. And I'll tell you something else too, as I close, and I believe this in my heart. I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, not once, not twice, but 3 times because I kept getting it wrong. I believe I'm starting to figure it out. You might disagree with this statement, but I will go to my grave believing it. If we do not marshal together as a Christian nation and defend this country by supporting the Second Amendment and what it protects, I feel this Lord is going to take this country away from us. I understand the argument, and I won't say that I necessarily disagree with it, that we don't have to be the world's police officer, but we certainly have to set the standard for what a country looks like. And there are countries around this globe, not the least of which is Australia. I know many of y'all know the names of Don Casey and Ken Freeman. That country sold its sovereignty away to the United Nations. And don't think for a single moment that can't happen here as well, because I lose patience very quickly with the argument of it can't happen here, we're America. Same thing was felt in Rome 500 years ago. So I challenge you today, as I challenge every single group I've ever spoken to, please, when you leave here today, whatever you've heard, take it somewhere. Number one, you know you got a concealed weapons permit, at least in Jefferson County, online. So you can do it today if you want. I encourage you to get the concealed weapons permit. I encourage you to support your local shooting ranges. I encourage you to talk to your children about it. I encourage you to take mom and the kids to the range with you. Heck, one of my sponsors in Hoover, or at Hoover Tactical in Birmingham, they got a restaurant. You can eat there. The point is that be active, not just supporters of the Second Amendment, but lovers of the Second Amendment as you put it in practice every single day. But please, when you go out, take this message out to the world. Take it. Don't just, one of the problems I have at church is we go to church. I'm talking to me personally. I'm not pointing fingers. We go to church. We hear these great messages. We raise our hand when the pastor says that this is you. All eyes closed. We go to Tzatziki's and get the Friday special, and then go back to work, and we wait till next Sunday. As witnesses to the Lord, we're going to take that to the streets every day. As protectors of the Second Amendment, we have to take that to the street every day. Because I'm going to tell you something as I close. I know Barack Obama got reelected. I know a lot of us aren't happy about it. But if you think for one moment that getting that man out of the office is the answer to this country's problems, you are dead wrong. He is not the problem. He is a symptom of where we are going. It's a bad symptom. It's a symptom that's got to go. But he is a symptom of an ever-expanding part of the population that doesn't give a tinker's darn about the future of this country. They're putting their own self-interest first, and it's our responsibility to bring them back in the fold, because regardless, this is our country. This is the United States of America, and it's ours to defend. If we don't, I assure you, we won't have a not to defend in a very short period of time. Thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate it very, very much.